next talk is being given by Mark North and Andrew North. Andrew has been interested in military history, especially the Napoleonic era, since seeing the 1970 film Waterloo, starring Rod Steiger and Christopher Plummer, and is an ardent fan of the Bernard Cornwell Sharpe series. I'm an ardent fan of Sean Bean, but never mind. Mark North has worked at the Dorset Museum for 10 years. He has an interest in local history, natural history, and is a bit of an expert on folklore. He's interested in William Barnes, of whom he is definitely an expert, and is a committee member of the William Barnes Society. And I've been ordered to read this last bit out. You might guess who they're referring to. They are both here today as they were press-ganged into doing this talk by accepting the King's shilling whilst drinking with somebody in the Blue Raddle. Andy and Mark, thank you.
Thank you for coming here today. We're going to talk about, we're going to explore the historical backdrop of the Trumpet Major novel, in particular preparations of the possible invasion around the South Dorset area. Now we're going on to sort of what would be the French preparation for the invasion of the United Kingdom, so I'll hand it over to my brother.
Good morning, everybody. Right, French preparation for the invasion of the United Kingdom. From 1803 to 1805, an army of 200,000 men, known as the Army of the Ocean Coast, or Army of England, were gathered and trained at camps at Boulogne. Port facilities at Boulogne were improved and the troops were occupied with constant training and frequent visits from Napoleon. Such was the anticipated success of the forthcoming operation that a triumphal column was erected at Boulogne. A large-scale test of the invasion craft, ordered by Napoleon against the advice of his naval commanders, showed how ill-designed for the task the boats were. Troop-carrying balloons were also considered as part of the invasion force. This, however, was not put in place due to the changeable channel weather.
Andy, would you mind facing the audience?
Yeah, of course. Though British cartoonists depicted this alongside the possibility of a tunnel route. Although Napoleon's fleet test proved unsuccessful, Britain continued preparing its defences from invasion. Perhaps the most visible example of countermeasures are the Martello Towers, built closest to the anticipated invasion landing sites, the southeast coast, Suffolk to Sussex. Standing up to 40 feet high, their construction made them ideal to resist cannon fire and provide a platform for an artillery piece able to traverse 360 degrees and fire. Dover Castle's defences were improved, having tunnels added to house more troops, earthworks erected to modernise existing defensive works. The Royal Military Canal was also built, running between Seabrook near Folkestone and Cliff End near Hastings. 28 miles in length, a defensible barrier to ensure a French army could not use the Romney Marsh as a bridgehead. Planned by Lieutenant Colonel John Brown of the Royal Staff Corps of Field Engineers and endorsed by the Prime Minister William Pitt and the Duke of York, Commander-in-Chief of the Army. More of him later. Constructed in two sections linked by the River Rover and River Breed, artillery batteries were located at about every 500 yards, where the canal was staggered to create a salient, which is a projecting part of a fortification trench system and line of defence, enabling guns to fire to the next stretch of water. A military road was built on the inland part of the canal, and the piled excavated soil from the canal provided protection for the troops stationed there. All the French preparation and successful conclusion to Napoleon's invasion of these islands were of course dependent on naval control of the English Channel. This would be accompanied by the breaking of the British Navy's blockade at Brest and Toulon, sailing the Franco-Spanish fleet across the Atlantic to threaten the West Indies with the British Navy in pursuit. Return, take control of the Channel before the British fleet could counter this tactic, enabling enough time to transport the French army across the Channel and invade. This plan was only partly successful. Part of the French-Spanish fleet did break the British blockade and cross the Atlantic, but did not assemble with the rest of the fleet as planned. On return to Europe, the French-Spanish encountered the British Navy blockading the French coast, where invasion vessels had been prepared and were defeated at the Battle of Cape Finisterre and forced back into port. On 27th of August 1805, Napoleon made the invasion force the core of the new Grand Army, and eventually it broke camp and marched eastwards to begin the campaign in Central Europe, which would culminate in possibly his greatest victory at Austerlitz. By the time of the Battle of Trafalgar, the 21st of October, the invasion had already been called off, ensuring the threat of invasion was lifted and victory of Nelson guaranteed British control of the Channel, ensuring any future invasion plans would be at least very difficult. Dorset preparation. Being that the French army was massed at Boulogne, in all probability the main landing would take place on the Kent coast. September 1804. In a letter to the Minister of War, Bervier, Napoleon said that Kent was the Grand Army's objective, being dictated by tides, winds, logistics of assembling an invasion force, the threat of the Royal Navy, the shortest route being the obvious choice through necessity. However, King George III was certain that Dorset was one of the more vulnerable parts of the kingdom, and increased activity by French forces from time to time at Brest may have caused him to think this. In June 1804, he wrote to his second son, Prince Frederick, Duke of York and Albany, Commander-in-Chief of the Army. I cannot deny that I'm rather hurt that there is any objection made to forming so large an army reserves in Dorchester, where, or in Cornwall, I think an attack more likely than in Essex, Kent or Sussex. Rumour and propaganda combined to spread fear in the minds of the local population. One such rumour was that one of Napoleon's brothers had come to England to find out whether the English working classes would rise up against the government, and that he was hiding in a French convent at Marnell with a large supply of arms and ammunition. This was later found to be a false report on completion of a search by magistrates. Napoleon himself was also reported to be reconnoitring the south coast, which is perhaps the basis of a story that Napoleon landed at Lulworth. He was observed by a French-speaking farmer's wife, and who, on seeing the obstacles of the landing of an army, folded his maps, ruefully said impossible, and returned to his waiting ship. The possibilities of the story are, however, small, though French agents could have operated along the coast, bearing in mind the amount of smuggling activity in the area. Reinforcements from the regular army. With the increased activity of French troops at Boulogne, the threat of invasion and the presence of the royal family meant that the county was not only garrisoned by volunteer militia and yeomanry, but a number of regular troops as well. Troop numbers would increase in the summer when the royal family were taking their holidays and invasion fears were at their highest. Provision for the billeting of these men was difficult. The purpose-built cavalry barracks at Weymouth, Dorchester, Wareham and Bridport started in 1794. Dorchester being completed first in June 1795. Weymouth Barracks, a larger establishment, was completed later in 1796 to 1797. Being built for 16 officers, 6 quartermasters, 169 other ranks, 188 horses and provision for 26 hospital beds. This was, however, insufficient as numbers requiring accommodation increased during the emergency. This being the state of affairs, surplus troops were billeted on the local community, either in inns, public houses or livery stables. A cavalry soldier would of course have to be housed with his mount. Though a payment was made to mine host of 5 pence a day per foot soldier, 7 pence a day for a cavalryman for subsistence, and 6 pence a day for each horse. Innkeepers would protest that this was not enough, and friction would arise when, for example, the quartermaster of the 1st Dragoons Thomas Wrench, complained that Thomas Johnson, innkeeper, provided inadequate straw for litter and allowance of corn for feed for a troop horse. Even after the new Act of May 1804, following a House of Commons inquiry, increased the amount paid to feed and lodge troops to 1 shilling 2 pence per horse and straw. There was no specified weight for hay and straw supplied, which gave rise for further complaints from innkeepers and publicans from both Wareham and Dorchester. Of course, the presence of so many military men, in particular the foreign troops of the King's German Legion, did enliven the social scene of the provincial towns. Weymouth, having the royal courts amongst its citizens, became a destination for high society with the numerous grand balls and events at the assembly rooms, a particular draw. Officers of the King's German Legion gained a reputation as fine dance partners and would amuse the local population with their broken English and attempts to introduce the ladies to the waltz. The military did indeed provide a distraction from the usual peacetime activities. An inhabitant of Wareham, Mr. Thomas Oldfield Bartlett, recorded observations in his diary. On the 9th of May 1808, he mentioned the 1st Heavy Dragoons of the King's German Legion and proudly listed the officers he knew. Whilst on the 15th of June 1808, he also gave a dinner for the officers of the 2nd Light Dragoons of the King's German Legion. The month of August saw Mr. Bartlett attend a mock battle or sham fight between the German cavalry regiments at a location south of Dorchester, though he recorded that the event was not worth going 10 miles to see. He had ridden from Wareham to see his new acquaintances, but was perhaps disappointed in the spectacle.
Everyone's familiar with the children's rhyme The Grand Old Duke of York, which was based on the activities around Bingham and the Ridgeway, which was alleged to be anyway. William Barnes also wrote the activities on the Ridgeway, which were based on actual incident involving a woman called Old Grace from Abbotsbury, who was on her way to Dorchester market to sell mackerel. In this poem, she is called Nanny Gill. And I'm going to try and attempt to read some dialect poetry by William Barnes, so forgive me if it doesn't sound that well. Right, Nanny Gill by William Barnes. There were times when Nanny Gill went soldiering against her will, back when the king came down to view his horse enfoot in red and blue, and they did march in rows and wheel in lines and bows below the king's own nose, and guns did point and swords did glare, and frightened foes that wouldn't there. Poor Nanny Gill did go to sell in town her glittering mackerel, a pack to care in even lots, a horse aback in pairing pots, and so she did right so, between her panniers wide, red cloaked in all her pride. Why, who but she, and who but broke the road of all her scarlet cloak? But Nanny's horse, that she did ride, once carried a sword against his side, and had to prick him in the rank, the soldier's spurs against his flank. And so, when he got sight, a sword a gleaming bright, and men again did fight, he set his eyes athwart the ground, and pricked his ears to catch the sound. The Nanny gave the side a kick, and hit him with his limber stick, but suddenly a horn did sound, and then the horsemen all fell bound, and her horse at sight went after him full fight. With Nanny in fright, and pulling with a screaming grin, her whole brown reins to hold him in, but now he went away full bound, as fast as he could tear the ground, and took in leer in soldier's pace, for Nanny's cloak and frightened face, while folk did laugh and shout to see her cloak a-streaming out, as she did wheel about, and crying, "Oh la, oh dear," in fright, while her horse did play sham fight.
Included in the ranks of the pleasure-seeking population was a Captain Edwin Griffith of the 15th Light Dragoons. In July 1805, the 15th Light Dragoons arrived in Weymouth, and the regiment camped at the village of Radipole. Here they joined the 1st Hussars King's German Legion and 3 brigades of horse and field artillery. At Radipole Barracks, located at Longmoor, Weymouth, were stationed the 1st and 2nd Dragoons Heavy Cavalry King's German Legion. In addition to the nearly 8,000 infantry, foot artillery, companies of riflemen camped in the area, there were around 11,000 troops located for the area's defence. The royal family at Weymouth, at the time to enjoy the bathing, frequently visited the troops. Throughout the summer, a number of field days were held, and the troops were exercised daily in outpost work, advance and rear guards. The light cavalry of the King's German Legion later gained a reputation to be the best in the British Army, and their training would without doubt been of benefit to Edwin and his regiment. The camp eventually broke up in September, and Edwin, with the rest of the 15th Light Dragoons, moved to the barracks near Weymouth to replace the Dragoons of the King's German Legion. Edwin was to write home just before Christmas and clearly missed his family, recording in his letter an invitation to attend a grand feast at Mr. Charles Buxton, although he was not complimentary about the other guests. Other than time spent socialising with the local ladies and dignitaries of the town, Edwin's time was spent on the repetitive routine of barrack life. Rising at 8 a.m, attired in his uniform, he would make sure his chestnuts, all of the horses of the regiment of the 15th Light Dragoons, had to be of that colour, had been made ready for their walking exercise. Following this, with reading the papers in the officers' mess, he would take breakfast in his room. Until midday, he would, when time permitted, complete his studies. After 12 noon, time would be spent inspecting his troops, making sure all rooms were clean, checking the regimental cooks had all provisions necessary for the men's meals. At 1 p.m, Edwin would mount his horse Pegasus to take lessons in the riding school until it was time to dress for evening parade. This would last at 4 p.m, and from then to 5 p.m. would write letters before having a good dinner in the mess room. At 7 p.m, he would inspect the stables, drink tea at 9 p.m, and go to bed at 10. As you can imagine, life so repetitive and mundane could mean some of the men would find ways to entertain themselves. A regimental order dated 17th of February 1806 would provide an example of this. The commanding officer has observed that in some rooms the men have amused themselves with throwing herring guts against the ceiling. If any such irregularity is again observed, the rooms will be fresh whitewashed at the expense of the men occupying them. Any breach of military discipline would be punished according to the nature of the offence. The punishment for a capital offence, i.e. desertion, would be carried out in the presence of troops stationed in the locality. In the case of the 2 non-commissioned officers in the York Hussars, executed on the downs near Binkham, the 4 troopers found guilty of the offence as well were later marched back to camp by the same men of the firing party to be dealt with later, probably the lesser punishment of flogging, again in front of assembled troops. The pattern of daily soldierly duties and social interaction with the locals at Weymouth would continue until January 1807, when the 15th Light Dragoons moved to Dorchester. While stationed here, the regiment in March 1807 was ordered to convert to Hussars, adopting a new uniform, including the famous pelisse or hanging jacket. Weapons to be carried to be a small carbine, a short-barrelled version of the infantry musket, a pistol, and light cavalry sabre, 1796. Remembered as one of the best of its time, and has been described as the finest cutting sword ever manufactured in quantity. In June, the regiment finally moved out of the county on its long journey to campaign in Portugal and Spain, gaining battle honours and a fine reputation along the way. Edwin Griffin, after seeing much action with his regiment, he saw his fair share of active service, eventually became a major in the 15th Hussars and taking part in the Waterloo campaign June 1815. Whilst leading his regiment, after the colonel had been wounded in a charge, he received 5 musket balls to the chest and died instantly.
Right, we'll go on to this picture now. This is taken at not far from where I live. It's St Nicholas Broadway. It's in the grounds of the church. The church is behind it. It's a Norman building. There lie 3 soldiers of the 15th Light Dragoons. Of interest, in one of the company was a trumpeter. And I'll read you the inscription because since I've taken this photograph, it's so weathered now. I think about 20 years ago you could actually make it out, and there's a very long verse on it. which I will read, which has been fortunately been transcribed, so I'll be able to read it to you. It reads, sacred to the memory of trumpeter Michael Melchior, Private James Muscle and John Newman of the 15th King's Regiment of Light Dragoons, who lay buried in this churchyard. This stone was raised as a mark of respect of the affectionate comrade, Anno Domini 1807. Trea juncta in una, which basically is Latin for three joined in one. And then this is the poem that is right at the bottom there, but now you can't read it anymore. The good and the brave in every clime with due regard shall meet, and travellers passing near this spot the soldiers' virtues greet. 3 light dragoons of 15 corps beneath our feet doth lay, their country duties have done, retired to parent clay. However good, however brave, to this at last we come. A soldier's valour near should yield to fear his foretell doom. Oft as a trumpet sounds to arms, their youthful bosoms glow, and native valour knew no bounds where here is found a foe. To deeds of arms the one has called, the others quickly obeyed, and comrades by each other's side great courage have displayed. O Melchior, with trumpet loud thy comrades oft do raise, be then prepared as the last call sound, sound to mortal praise. Those comrades you have left behind, these little rites do give. 'Tis all the generous bosoms can, 'tis all thou canst receive. It's more than likely that Hardy would have read this poem because there's poet inscription, because Crickmays actually did work on some of the buildings around that area, especially the church, which I think was later than Hardy, but the school, which is directly opposite, I think Hardy was involved. And also just down the road from there is the Hounsell stone, marble and granite works which are at Broadway, which Hardy had close connections with and visited. So he had close connections to this area, so I wouldn't be surprised if he would have read this, because the inscription would have been a lot more legible at this time.
John Loveday, Light Dragoon. The British cavalry of the Napoleonic Wars had 2 main components. Heavy cavalry, comprising the household cavalry, dragoon guards and dragoons. These were attired in red jackets, though there was the exception of the Royal Horse Guards, who wore blue. The light cavalry, comprising light dragoons and hussars, these regiments wore blue jackets. Reading the Trumpet Major, although a detailed description of John Loveday's uniform is not forthcoming, a general reference is made. Chapter 1, what was seen from the window overlooking the down. Other troops had during the last few minutes been ascending the down as a remoter point and now drew near. These were different weight and build from the others, lighter men in helmets, hats with white plumes. So possibly a Tarleton light cavalry helmet. Chapter 3, in which the mill becomes an important centre of operations. Few would have supposed that the white coat and blue coats of miller and soldier covered the forms of father and son. Chapter 10, the matchmaking virtues of a double garden. So his epaulettes and blue jacket and Anne's yellow gypsy hat were often seen in different parts of the garden. With these few references to John's uniform, he can make a calculated guess to his branch of the cavalry. With these facts in mind, I return to the description of Edwin Griffith's uniform. Would have consisted of a short, tight-fitting jacket in dark blue, laced across the front with 20 bars of silver braid. The regulations call for scale epaulets and wings, but it is uncertain whether the 15th Light Dragoons wore this. Buff breeches and long black boots, all topped by a Tarleton helmet with a black fur crest and a distinctive all-scarlet plume and turban, a regimental distinction. Though the officers would be more ornate and of better quality, the rank and file would be the same.
The alarm. The king's safety when visiting Weymouth was paramount. As the war progressed and was of great importance, there was a plan to carry him and the royal family to London should Dorset be invaded. His coach was always on standby when he was staying at the Gloucester Lodge. In May 1804, the king and his family were visiting Weymouth when news of French fleet was seen off the Isle of Portland, There was a heavy fog that morning, and signal stations located along the coast at Abbotsbury, Golden Cap and the Verne had no visibility. This meant that news came from the local Coast Guard, who were finding it difficult to view the sea through the fog and the attendant limited visibility. The alarm was raised and the volunteer militia were mobilised on the heads towards Portland. We can only imagine the panic of the local population as they fled inwards towards Beer Regis, the road over the Ridgeway, and the procession of carriages, carts carrying their human cargoes and associated possessions. Thankfully, it was realised that there was no French landing, but a group of fishing boats. It was not noted in Parliament when MP referred to the residents of the Weymouth area as panic-stricken bumpkins. But during the 19th century, as with those previous, beacons as positioned along the Dorset coast to alert the local population of immediate invasion. These were set on prominent positions and were fueled by rushes. One such site was near where Hardy Monument stands, indicating position and a plan for the network of importance as method to communicate an emergency. And I've got these pictures here, which were of plans of the county of Dorset in 1804, divided in divisions showing beacons, signal posts erected by government depots, and plans of assembly for volunteer corps. So, you can see that there. These are in the museum's collection, so I was quite privileged to see these. This is more of a close-up, so you've got black down there where now the Hardy Monument is now positioned. And just onto the right hand corner, you've got what's called Piddletown Heath. It's where the one that Hardy refers to, which is probably nearby his home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark and Andy. I've certainly learnt a lot about the Napoleonic era. Thank you very much, and for the reading, especially in Dorset dialect, Mark. Well done, well done.